Okay, so Ian's been playing the beta of Diablo 4 for us, and first impressions. Give me like a 1-sentence summary if you can.
It's good. I want to play more.
Nice. Okay, great. So what parts of the game have you played and seen so far?
So the beta that we played it very much kicks off with the prologue, and then you get to play through Act 1, and then that's about it.
Okay, great. And so with Act 1, what is the kind of story, how you dropped into the world? Like, how is it linking to previous Diablo games, or is this like a fresh new setting and fresh new characters?
So the game actually kicks off with the opening cinematic that was unveiled at BlizzCon in 2019. So obviously, it kind of very quickly sets up the stakes. The daughter of hatred, Lilith, has been returned to the world, and then you very kind of quickly find yourself thrusted into the situation without getting into it too far. But throughout the kind of prologue and up into Act 1, there is a kind of that vibe that everything is in a shambles, everyone is scrambling around, trying to figure it out and deal with it as they figure it out.
So how open-ended is the story progression this time?
So it's open-ended to an extent. So when you do the prologue, you very much hit this point in the story where it's very much goes, okay, let's go our own way. Let's sort of split up. And that's when on your quest log, you kind of see Act 1, 2, and 3. And technically, you can kind of progress them as you see fit, although each act does kind of have like a level requirement. So technically you can, but like it's very guided. So for example, by the time that I finished Act 1, I was roughly around level 15. And the first kind of quest for Act 2, you need to be about level 10, and for Act 3, you need to be about level 15. So if you really want to, like, you can very much do whatever those acts however you fancy, but it's very much guided in a way. And then there's still that whole, okay, we need to separate, do the stuff, do the things, and then we regroup and progress forward. So there's a little bit of flexibility in there, but not like...
But it's the typical thing that game developers are doing at the moment, where they love saying in interviews and on PR sheets and stuff, they're going, you can do it in any order you want, brackets, but we're level gating it. It's just this thing of like, it seems like they think that everybody wants to be like, no, I understand Acts 1, 2, and 3. Like, I know I have to do with it in this order. But at least there's a little bit of flexibility. If you do want to do one mission from here or go to this area, you're not as completely hemmed in.
Yeah, exactly. I think if you're very much like engaged in the open world and doing side quests and leveling up, then you probably have a bit more flexibility than others. But if you're the sort of player who you want to get like the story and campaign out of the way first and then engage with everything else.
So I've heard that the open world feels a bit more like an MMO. How have you found it?
So that's sort of another buzzword, isn't it? There's sort of everyone's like tapping into MMO elements, right? Like even sort of Diablo Immortal, for instance, has its open MMO elements. There's very much that sort of... There is an open world you can like freely walk across, and each sort of area segmented and has levels, and there's that sort of... The interesting thing that I kind of got a sense of, and something that at least sparked a curiosity of, is like when you're kind of out and about, you have sort of side quests, if you like, but then there's also other things to kind of make the world feel a bit more alive. Like there's these kind of instance events and dungeons. So for example, I remember when I was doing a bit of side questing, I was walking to a town and sort of came across sort of this abandoned cart, which was an event, and then naturally you go and you get ambushed by a bunch of sort of bandits. And it's that typical kind of like, okay, stick in this area, survive for however many minutes. But then obviously once you do that, you then kind of pick up this quest item that sort of leads you to a side quest in another town.
Oh, so there's a nice thread that it's not just like... Because one of the things Destiny did a lot of that. But then it would be like, you defeat the tank, great, done. Whereas now they're like, within the cart you find this, which takes you onto this extra... They're adding nuance to those scripted events to a certain extent.
Yeah, like there's that kind of gameplay element where it's like they kind of use the side quest to teach you the game. Like when you kind of come to the first big town, there's a side quest that is very much, everything's sort of in shambles, go, and the troops need a bit of a morale boost. So, go and emote in front of them, and that teaches you how to how to wave and dance in front of people.
Do you know what the troops love? They love a good flossing. They love it. It really gets them prepped for battle.
Exactly. I mean, the Mother of Hatred is coming, but
but look at you pop locking in the
give
corner.
them a good wave.
So, and there also are some multiplayer elements as well.
Yeah, so like that kind of taps into like the social elements as well, right? Like obviously in our preview build, like we didn't get to play the Fields of Hatred, the whole kind of player on player event that you'd get, but there was kind of co-op. So it's that sort of, it's very interesting because I don't think I got to sort of see it in the build, but I think there is at least some curiosity sparked, right? Like I remember when it kind of comes to interacting with other players in an open world, there's always that vibe of paying it forward. Like I remember when I was playing Final Fantasy XIV in the very early stages, like when I was just sort of a new warrior of light running around in like pathetic garb and things, like I had to kind of level up out in this kind of open field. And at the very same time, like this very group of high level people, you know, they had like the shiny armor, like the fancy chocobos, and I couldn't even ride a mount yet because I hadn't unlocked it. And I was trying to kill like these bosses that would spawn in to level up. The thing was like because they had mounts, they would just rush over, kill it, and then, you know, I'd be running over, and by the time I got there, like it was done, they were dead. Yeah. And after like huffing around after them for like 5 or 10 minutes, eventually one of them turned around and went, okay, just get on my mount. Like, you know, I'll like just Sherpa you from area to area.
Yeah.
But then you kind of get that vibe of like paying it forward and being like, okay, like someone was nice to me, maybe I'll pay that forward. And I think in kind of Diablo 4's open world, I kind of get the vibe that something of that might happen. Like, for example, when I was sort of questing, when you kind of go through like the more open areas, sometimes you do go through a level or an area that's higher level than you are. And obviously the enemies sting a lot more. And, you know, if you kind of come across maybe an instance where maybe there's a, what you might call it, an ambush of people who are higher level within you, and maybe, or there's just something to grind for, and then, you know, someone might come forward and help you out because they're higher level. And there's always that thing of, oh, maybe I'll pay that forward and I'll help somebody else out. But the interesting thing I'm curious to see about Diablo is the opposite's true. You know, you could easily find yourself perhaps in a field of hatred where you're grinding for gear and then someone comes along and just sort of, you know, assassinates you and takes your stuff, and you're usually kind of just sat there and you're kind of like, okay, I want to pay that forward now. I just want to basically be an asshole with a OP build, and I'm just going to like
anybody I come across, I'm just going to steamroller through.
Yeah, exactly. Do unto others what was done to me.
So yeah, that's going to be a very interesting social dynamic when there are those tools there for being positive or being negative, paying it forward, or just being like, and like you say, the game will out. Whatever seems to be the main dynamic within the social structure of that game will probably then filter down and be a consistent one. It's going to be interesting to see how multiplayer develops on the co-op level and in the field of hatred. So how does it actually feel to play? That's a really big thing within Diablo. And then also the skill trees that then will pull into that.
So playing through the prologue and Act 1, I think there's still that element of like the game's gradually unfolding. So there's definitely lots of like gameplay and systems that we haven't seen yet, but it's very much that like, because of the open world, like, so for example, I start with a rogue, and you know, you kind of start with your knife and you start with a bow and arrow, and at first like there's these great hordes of enemies and it's a bit more kind of overwhelming than you'd think because you don't really have the tools to properly kind of like thin them out. But then it's sort of like the more you progress down your tree, then all of a sudden, you know, you get an ability to throw your knife rather than just stab someone with it, so you can get a bit of distance, and then you unlock something on the skill tree that allows it to ricochet. And then more and more you feel that build kind of forming, and then all of a sudden these big kind of enemies that were sort of a pain in the ass are more manageable. And from what I played, the way the skill tree works is you kind of start with like a cluster. So it's basically like, for my first one as a rogue, I could either augment how my knife or my bow worked. So for example, at first I could just stab people with my knife, then I gained the ability to throw it, and then I kind of gained the ability to ricochet it. And then the more you kind of upgrade that cluster, you eventually gain access to like the second cluster that has maybe opens things up a bit more. So you still have ways that you can kind of improve and new abilities and new ways to use your knife and your bow and arrow, but then maybe there's also a stat boost there. Maybe you're more durable, maybe you do more critical damage. And then you kind of get to the third cluster, and then all of a sudden you kind of get the access to, well, what if I place down traps? So you're first introducing the concept, and then you go to another cluster, and then you're like, okay, what if I just put down a poison trap? And then all of a sudden, when you kind of have this horde rushing towards you, you can kind of put down a poison trap that thins them out a bit. You can throw a knife, it ricochets around, or you can just sort of, rather than fire one arrow, you can fire a volley of arrows, and it's kind of like that very interesting and unfolding thing. And at least in the early game, it's kind of, you can refund your points quite easily. So if you if you kind of make a misclick and you're kind of like, okay, this kind of sounded quite cool on paper, but it's actually not all that great, and then you can kind of refund it. But there's a little bit of tinkering to be done, because obviously you can't just like refund the entirety of your first cluster, right? Because you need enough kind of power and experience to take you to the second cluster.
Right, okay.
So like you can refund it a little bit and put those points elsewhere to make a more interesting build, but you can't refund it totally.
Okay, cool. So total respecking is out. So you do need to be slightly careful. Mm-hmm. But if you try out a new skill and go, that doesn't synergize how I expected it to, you can at least take that a couple of steps back.
Yeah.
And go somewhere else. Okay, well that's good. What is your favourite character right now out of the Rogue, Sorceress, Barbarian, Druid, and the Necromancer?
It's definitely the Rogue. I think like one of my choice bad habits from anything with that is I pick a class and I adopt it and I make it my personality. So when I played like Hunter, for example, Destiny, I just had 3 Hunters, and then eventually, after maybe like 100 or 200 hours, I then was sort of like, okay, fine, exactly. You know when you're part of those raid groups where there's basically just like, you're gonna bring a Titan or you're gonna bring a Warlock, and you're like, sorry, I've only got 3 Hunters.
Yeah, exactly.
And
who's gonna be the healer? Not me.
And I kind of beeline straight for the Rogue, because in Diablo 2, you kind of have like an assassin, which, you know, very much stabby assassin type. And then in Diablo 3, you have the Demon Hunter, who's more kind of bow and arrow, whereas Rogue kind of feels like a merriment of the two. So obviously, you have all like the knife tricks.
It's great that they've done little things like, as soon as you said that you were playing loads of the Rogue, I was a bit like, ooh, how's that going to be for crowd control, which is obviously a very large part of Diablo. And the fact that you said straight away in the skill tree, you've got skills to negate that, or to help you with that. So there's a nice thing where it's like, it doesn't feel like you're getting penalized for taking a character that is maybe not necessarily archetypally built for certain situations.
Yeah.
Like, you have options, which is nice.
It's definitely a time investment. Like, when I first picked the Rogue, I very much felt like, okay, I'm very much not equipped for these big crowds.
Yeah.
But then, like, the more and more as you go, and the more sort of demons that you pop, like pinatas or fleshy pinatas for loot, you get better gear, and the more kind of your skill tree you unlock, then you kind of gain the means to deal with it, thankfully.
Nice. So you mentioned the loot. How is the loot grind and the loot itself another key part of Diablo? There seems to be so many, but the loot is a very big one.
Oh yeah, like, it's one of those like small joys of Diablo, like when you just pick up a random hood and your kind of guy's outfit just like augments and you're just wearing this like random hodgepodge of gear that you found in loot. Like, it's still like an absolute thrill as well. Like, there's a certain thing about Diablo when you kill an enemy and it just kind of like, the loot just kind of pops out of it, and there's always that kind of like, what is this? And it's sort of like, the loot kind of felt quite good and generous as well. Like, I always kind of like, even though I was kind of like tootling around doing things, I always kind of felt like I was finding loot that improved what I got. There was also like, one of my favorite parts as well was like, I was kind of doing this dungeon, and at one point you just see this goblin with this like sack, and obviously it's like this loot goblin, and it's just kind of like your eyes light up.
Get him!
Exactly, yeah. I think I had my throwing knives at this point, so I was just tossing knives at him, and he was just kind of running around like dropping coins, and then eventually you kill him, all these like whoops just kind of like
the excitement and the like, when I played before, and then like the group chat just completely descends, like, okay, cool, so we're gonna go here, and then somebody sees a loot goblin and everyone just goes nuts. Just like, all of the tactic goes, you just Leroy Jenkins right to him, doesn't matter where he leads you, like, get him! And then it's just like, wait, where are we?
Well, that's the thing, because like he runs away from you, and like I never found out like if he can escape, but it was one of those things where like you don't want to find out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're like, it's just like really for checking this out for the preview, I should let him go. I'm not gonna let him go. You're dying.
No, exactly. It's like I appreciate that the Daughter of Hatred is running around, but nothing is more important than me getting my new hood.
Exactly. Lilith is just behind that door. So the develop finally. I just want to talk about like the end game. I'm aware that you haven't got there, but it's something that a lot of people are very excited about, and the developers have said that they anticipate the end game will entertain people for thousands of hours. I know this is hard to say at the moment, but just to round it off, do you feel that there could be lots of endgame content with this?
I feel like it's one of the things that's like unanswered for me from this kind of preview, just because it's sort of like partly like it's so early, there are still systems that are still to show themselves, and you know, as we said, like there's things like the Field of Hatreds that are not very there, and as well like there's always that social dynamic which really carries things, right? Like, you know, Diablo 2 feels very much carried by its modding scene, and it's very much, I think in a way, like I've not sort of seen enough to confidently say, oh yeah, this is a game I'll pay for like thousands of hours, but I think it's definitely a game I want to see more of and I want to play more of.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like, I want more of it. Do I want that many hours? Am I going to play beyond the end game? Like, it's hard to say right now.
But so far, pretty good.
So far, very good. I very much just want to be running around with my rogue.
And no other characters.
No other characters, you know.
For all the Diablo 4 news, previews, and I'm sure eventually a review, make sure you get subscribed to GamesRadar.